Welcome to Littlefinger, the rise of Petyr Baelish, a Game of Thrones story, written by Brian M. Brumbaugh, narrated by Ned Rattor, before he was Lord of Harrenhal, before the Vale, before the dagger that started a war. Petyr Baelish was just a boy with a broken heart, a borrowed name, and a hunger for power that would change the realm. This is the story of how the smallest man in the room became its most dangerous. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Blood in the Rain. Riverrun, 282 AC, 2 days after the duel with Brandon Stark. The rain had not stopped. It tapped against the stone walls of Riverrun like 1,000 accusing fingers, echoing in the high corridors and trickling into the pale silence of the sick room. Petyr Baelish lay beneath sweat-dampened sheets, his chest wrapped in linen stiff with dried blood. Each breath tasted of rust and shame. He couldn't lift his head without pain. Brandon Stark had made sure of that. They'd said it was mercy that the Northmen stopped short of killing him. They were wrong. Mercy would have been quick. Brandon had wanted him to live, to remember every second of his humiliation, carved into flesh and spirit alike. The door creaked. A soft figure entered the chamber. Petyr! It was Lisa. Her voice trembled like a harp string, caught between guilt and yearning. She crept closer, face pale beneath her auburn hair, eyes wet with something more than the rain. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "I had to see you. They won't let me visit." "Father," she stopped, biting her lip. "He says you're to be sent away." Of course he was. Sent home to the Fingers like a scolded dog, stripped of his pride, his post, his Catelyn. He tried to smile. It hurt. "And does your father still believe you're his obedient little girl?" Lysa blushed, then lowered herself beside the bed. I told Maester Vyman I would bring herbs. For your fever?" Petyr's eyes flickered to the door. "And what else did you bring?" Her hand emerged from her cloak, holding a folded piece of parchment, his seal, his handwriting, a letter he'd written to Catelyn before the duel. Young, foolish words dripping with love and desperation. "I found it in her room. She didn't read it. She burned it." He looked away, jaw tight. "Of course she did. I would have read it," Lisa whispered. "Every word. I would have kept it." Her fingers brushed his. "I did keep it." Silence fell, thick and awkward. Petyr's gaze returned to her, slower this time. Lysa Tully, not Catelyn, never Catelyn. "But perhaps—" He winced, shifting. "You should go. If they catch you, I'm carrying your child." The words were ice. Petyr froze. He stared at her, searching her face for deceit. She blinked, then lowered her gaze, and in that one moment he knew it was true. Lisa's voice was barely a breath. "I went to Grand Maester Mellos. He gave me moon tea." A cold, hollow ache spread in his chest, not from the wounds, from the realization she had wanted to love him, and they had taken even that. He turned his face to the wall. "I'm sorry." She rose, hurt flaring in her eyes. "You're always sorry, but you never stop." The door creaked again. This time it was a guard. Lisa slipped out before she was seen. The silence returned, cruel as ever. Later that night, Lord House Tully visited. He stood like a monument carved from old grudges, stern, tall, unforgiving. "You will leave at dawn," he said. "No pleasantries, no kindness. A ship waits to carry you down river. You'll return to the Fingers. I will not see your face in Riverrun again." Petyr tried to speak. Hoster raised a hand. "You may have survived the duel, but you lost more than blood. You lost honour. You will not touch my daughters again." Petyr stared at the ceiling, rain tapping above. "I understand, my lord." "No," Hoster growled. "You don't. But you will. When he was gone, Petyr lay in darkness, alone with the taste of ash and bile in his throat. The girl he loved was lost. The child he never knew was erased. The world had crushed him without killing him. But from that silence a thought bloomed. If he could not have them, he would own them, their names, their titles, their game. He would not be Petyr of the Fingers, he would be Baelish, master of coin, master of secrets, master of men. And one day they'd all remember the little boy who loved too much, not with pity, with fear. Chapter 2. The Quiet Boy from the Fingers. The sea off the Fingers had a way of gnawing at the soul, like cold teeth biting slow through bone. The wind howled without pause, and the skies rarely changed, grey, unforgiving, low. Petyr Baelish stood on the cliff edge just beyond the crumbling tower of his family's keep, staring at the endless waves below. He'd been back 6 months, and the wind still refused to let him forget what he'd lost. There was nothing grand about House Baelish. The tower was squat and moss-stained, barely more than a glorified chimney of stone and shadow. The small folk didn't bow when they saw him. His boots squelched in the same muck they trudged through. The title of Lord held as much power here as a prayer in a storm. A lone goat bleated from the courtyard, tangled in a discarded fishing net. Petyr turned from the sea, his fingers clenched inside his sleeves. He'd stopped feeling the cold 3 weeks ago, or maybe he just stopped caring. He'd left Riverrun in silence, carried downstream like refuse. The duel with Brandon Stark had broken more than ribs. It had shattered something quiet inside him. Pride, perhaps, illusion, love. Whatever it was, it bled freely. The riverboat was slow. He barely spoke. His meals were sparse. Bread, dried meat, cold stew. At night he lay curled in the corner of the captain's cabin, watching candlelight dance across wooden beams, remembering the smell of Catelyn's hair, the way her eyes had never softened, not once, even when he'd bled in front of her. Lysa had visited him in the dark. She'd wept and whispered and kissed his fingers with shaking lips. She told him about the child, about the tea. Then she left. She always left. In the Fingers time crawled. His father greeted him with a nod and a cup of sour beer. There were no words of comfort, just a muttered, roofs leaking, and an expectation that Petyr would patch it. He did, along with the goat pen, the cistern, the chimney flue, and the cellar stairs. Lord Baelish, if he even called himself that any more, drank through most days, muttering about crab pots and men who owed him debts. Petyr kept his head down and his ears open. No one expected him to be clever. That was the gift of being forgotten, until a ship came to port. The Maiden's Solace was a bloated merchant vessel with peeling sails and a surly Tyroshi quartermaster named Belasco. Petyr offered to help unload crates. Then he offered to track inventories. By the third docking, Belasco had invited him into his cabin for sweet wine and salted almonds. "You're no dock rat," the merchant said, squinting over a ledger. "What's your game, Baelish?" "No game," Petyr lied. "Just numbers." Belasco chuckled. "Numbers are a game, boy. You play them well." Petyr began trading on his own after that. Salted fish, eel skins, dried mussels from the neighbouring coast. Nothing glamorous, but it was coin, enough to catch the eye of a hedge knight's lady who craved Tyroshi buttons and summer Isle lace. He tripled his profits before the first frost. With each ledger entry, with each pouch of coin tied shut, something inside him stirred again. A hunger, not for love, not any more. 4 more. He left the Fingers in autumn, clutching a forged trade letter signed in his father's unsteady hand. Goldtown welcomed him with the chill of salt air and the scent of too many bodies pressed too close. He found a room above a stable that smelled of hay and damp rot, and he walked the streets from dawn to dusk, watching. He mapped the markets. He noted which booths drew the rich and which drew the hungry. He listened at taverns where sailors drank away memory and merchants bragged too loudly about coin they didn't have. He introduced himself as a clerk, then as a junior merchant, then as a baelish. It was in the baker's quarter that he saw her, Kyra Coldwater, a minor lady of a minor house, beautiful, brash and bored. She had black hair, wine-red lips, and the kind of laugh that promised trouble. He watched her buy honey cakes and blackberries. She caught him staring. "You look like someone who doesn't belong here," she said. "I often don't," Petyr replied. She smiled. "Good. I'm tired of people who do." They met again at a glassmaker's shop, then again at the harbour. By the end of the week, she was sneaking him through the back gate of her father's villa. It was reckless, dangerous, irresistible. He tasted her breathless and wild on silken sheets that smelled of cedar and perfume. Her skin was warm beneath his trembling hands. She kissed like someone who knew he didn't matter, and he clung to her like he did. It lasted a month. Her brother returned from patrol sooner than expected. Petyr was still half-dressed when Sir Edric Coldwater threw him down the stairs and into the mud. There was no duel, no ceremony, just fists, knees, and a boot to the ribs. Kyra watched from a window above, arms crossed. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. That hurt more than the bruises. He limped through the snow-choked paths of the Vale, sleeping in barns and begging bread when he had to. He made it back to the Fingers by midwinter, thinner and harder than when he left. Lysa's next letter arrived weeks later. It was short, formal. Her father had betrothed her to John Arryn. The marriage would occur in the spring. Petyr read it twice, then fed it to the fire, but one name stayed with him. John Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie, Hand of the King, one of the few men with reach that extended from mountain top to capital. He spent 2 days crafting his reply. Humble, eloquent, careful, he asked only to serve, as a scribe, a steward, anything. "I would be honoured to serve the great house that shaped my boyhood," he wrote, sealing it with a wax-stamped mockingbird sigil of his own design. Not quite heraldry. Not yet. 3 months passed. Then came the raven. The Eyrie would receive him. No fanfare, no explanation, just permission. Petyr said nothing to his father. He packed a small satchel with his ledger, 2 quills, a cracked seal stamp, and the same ring he'd worn during the duel at Riverrun. At dawn, the same dock he'd stood upon as a boy greeted him again. Wet, cold, wind-churned. A different ship awaited him, slower, older, but it didn't matter. It was taking him up the Vale, toward the sky. That night, hunched in the dark of the captain's cabin, Petyr opened his ledger and scratched a single line beneath a column of dried eel profits. "Everything they denied me, I will take." He closed the book, pressed his fingers to the seal, and blew out the candle. In the darkness he smiled. Chapter 3. Letters and Lies. The Eyrie, 283 AC. The Eyrie was a palace carved from sky. Its corridors gleamed with pale stone and wind-chilled glass, a marvel balanced atop the world's bones. Petyr Baelish stood in its lowest hall, his cloak heavy with mountain frost, boots cracked from the climb, and eyes red from the dry, biting air. He felt smaller than he had ever felt at Riverrun, smaller than he had at the Fingers. Even smaller than that day on the rain-slick bluff when he'd vowed to take what the world had denied him. A steward passed without acknowledging him. Another bumped his shoulder with a stack of ledgers and didn't pause to apologise. He was here, and he was invisible. Petyr's appointment was minor, officially listed as assistant to the sub-steward of storage records and supply rotation. His first task was reorganising a decade's worth of dusty parchment into winter order. No one explained what that meant. He learned by watching. The sub-steward, a man with a face like boiled cabbage, barely spoke. His office smelled of ink, old wool, and dried pigeon droppings. Petyr kept quiet, kept moving, and kept reading. When he wasn't working, he wandered. The Eyrie was full of wings, literal and political. Every level had its secrets. He began noting which bannermen lodged in which quarters, who drank late, who spoke loud, who flirted with kitchen maids, and who slipped into the rookery too often. He asked questions with his eyes. He answered none with his mouth. The first letter he stole was a mistake. Or so he told himself. He'd been delivering copies of inventory scrolls to the rookery when he noticed one raven already dead. Its scroll dropped between the slats of the roost floor. A simple thing, unsealed, addressed to Sir Gerald Grafton in Gulltown. He picked it up, glanced once, then again. The words were mundane, a merchant dispute, but the signature was interesting. Maester Coleman, the very same who'd turned him away from the High Hall last week. Petyr returned the scroll without smudging it, but later that night he began drafting names, whose messages went where, who received more ravens than they sent, patterns, imbalances, weak points. It became a habit. By early spring he knew how to forge Coleman's hand well enough to fool a sleepy steward. Just minor things at first. Confirmation of pantry supplies, a changed meeting time, a delay in wine barrels. Nothing large enough to be noticed, nothing important enough to be missed. It was not ambition, it was survival. But ambition was coming. Lisa arrived in the 4th month. She stepped off the mule cart, wrapped in blue velvet, her face gaunt, eyes tired, mouth a little too tight. Petyr watched from the upper corridor as she entered the Eyrie's main hall, Lord John Arryn greeting her with a fatherly kiss on the forehead. They were to be married in 6 weeks. Everyone knew, no one cheered. She spotted Petyr 3 days later in the corridor outside the Hall of Birds. He pretended not to see her. She approached anyway. "You haven't written," she said. He bowed slightly. "Didn't think it would be appropriate. You didn't think it would be safe." Her voice was sharper than he remembered. John mustn't know. He studied her face. She was still beautiful in that fragile, trembling way, but something inside her had twisted into defence. "I wouldn't ruin your prospects," he said coolly. "You ruined me already." She left before he could answer. He didn't chase her this time. 1 week later, he received a summons. Lord John wanted to see him. The High Hall of the Eyrie was cold, echoing, and full of judgment. John Arryn sat beneath a massive arched window, sunlight painting him in gold. He was older than Petyr remembered, his hair all white, his face lined like dry parchment. "You've been asking questions," John said, voice calm but firm. Petyr didn't flinch. "Curiosity, my lord. I like to understand how things work, and you've been copying ledgers, privately, outside your duties." "That's true." He met the old man's gaze. "But only so I can find waste and save you coin." John raised a single brow. "Is that so? I've identified 7 overlapping supply contracts that cost your household near 4,000 silver stags a year. With your permission, I'd like to renegotiate them." Silence. "Then you're a clever rat, Baelish. I prefer hawk." John cracked a smile. "You're not bold enough for a hawk." "Not yet. A day later, Petyr was reassigned to the Ares financial clerkship. He moved into better quarters, got warmer clothing, received nods from stewards who previously ignored him. He now answered directly to Maester Coleman and Lord John Arryn himself, at least when it came to coin. And coin was power. The first bribe he took was subtle. A merchant from Pebble walked in, red-faced and blustering about backlogged grain carts. Petyr offered to expedite the paperwork. The man left 3 silver stags under a ledger sheet without a word. Petyr left them there until dusk, then pocketed them. He used the money to buy scented ink and finer parchment. Began writing letters again, not to Lisa, not to Catelyn, to merchants, to scribes, to stable-masters and quartermasters and second sons of second lords. He asked about prices, about shortages, about rumours of land disputes and barge delays. He offered coin for good answers, secrets for better ones. No one noticed at first. Then they began replying. The Ares Ravenmaster, a man named Serwyn, took ill. Petyr took over his duties unofficially for 3 days. He memorised the cipher index kept beneath the rookery's bench, noted the pinched wax colours of 6 key houses, rewrote 3 messages, burned one. Later, he told himself he'd done it to protect Lysa. But he knew better. On the night of John Arryn's wedding to Lisa, the snow came in thick, slow waves. The great hall was full of cold meat and polite dancing. Petyr sat near the rear, sipping watered wine, watching them. Lisa looked radiant. Her smile was paper-thin. John looked like a man who'd just agreed to outlive his own peace. That night, alone in his quarters, Petyr took out his oldest letter, the one Lisa had once written by candlelight after the duel at River Run. "I'll wait for you, Petyr. I swear it." He burned it. He didn't cry. Weeks passed. He grew bolder. Petyr began hosting private meals in the lesser kitchens after hours. Only 4 or 5 people at a time, always different guests. Cooks, squires, junior scribes. He listened, laughed, drank little, asked questions. They spoke freely. People always do when they think you're beneath them. One guest, a minor bastard from House Royce, spoke of a recent quarrel between Lord Grafton and a sellsword group paid to guard the Gulltown treasury. A day later, Petyr wrote 2 anonymous letters, one to the sellswords suggesting Grafton planned to replace them, one to Grafton suggesting the sellswords were negotiating with House Sunderland. 2 weeks later, the contracts fell apart. John Arryn had to intervene personally. Petyr wasn't caught, but Varys would have approved. By the end of the year, Petyr had become indispensable. He tracked contracts, balanced supply against levy, proposed a new system of barge rotation that cut waste by 1/3. When John Arryn prepared to return to King's Landing for the spring court, he took Petyr with him. "I need someone to manage crown expenses on the road," the old man said. Petyr bowed, expression humble, but inside he smiled. He'd spent a year learning how the Eyrie worked. Now he would learn the capital, and when he finished with that, he'd own it. Chapter 4. The game begins. King's Landing, 284 AC. The capital stank. Petyr noticed it before the gates had even opened. It came down the wind, a thick perfume of fish guts, horse dung, burnt tallow, and boiling piss. The smell of power, he decided, because only the powerful could afford to live in a place so wretched and still call it civilized. From the moment his boots touched cobblestone, he hated it and loved it. The Red Keep stood like a jagged crown over a rotting skull. Its towers bled light at dusk, and the walls never stopped whispering. Petyr walked them with eyes wide, boots silent, cloak plain. He was nobody here, Not yet. He arrived as a member of Lord John Arryn's extended household staff. Advisor on financial matters was the phrase John used, but no one took it seriously. Not the guards, not the chamberlains, certainly not the rest of the small council. Varys called him the boy with numbers and not enough manners. Grand Maester Pycelle didn't bother learning his name. Stannis Baratheon didn't even look at him. And yet he was there, in the room, quiet, watching. He always watched. His official post was a cramped office in the old servants' wing, just large enough for a desk, 3 chairs, and a broken window with a view of a wall. He worked there alone. No assistants, no scribes, no foot traffic. Perfect. The first thing he did was make copies of the Crown's debt ledgers. The second thing he did was begin falsifying them. Nothing dramatic, just small entries shifted, amounts rounded up or down, dates blurred. He began tracking who owed the Crown money and, more importantly, who the Crown owed. The numbers were bad. Robert Baratheon's appetite for tourneys and wine outpaced his treasury. The realm was held together by parchment, promise, and fear of what came next. Petyr saw opportunity in every unpaid bill. He started writing letters. His first lunch invitation was declined, so was the second. But the third, to a minor spice merchant with interests in Lannisport and lace, was accepted. They met in a low tavern off Silk Street. Petyr ordered wine. The merchant laughed at his modest robe and asked him what the game was. "No game," Petyr said. "Just a chance to invest in your future." He pulled out a list. Names, amounts, debts the Crown hadn't paid in 3 years. "What if I told you I could make these disappear, on paper, for a price?" The merchant leaned forward. "Go on." By the end of the week, Petyr had 4 more meetings. By the end of the month, he had an informal network, moneylenders, ship captains, minor nobles with too many cousins and not enough gold. He offered them discretion and influence. In return, he asked for coin, not much, but always in cash, always in advance. John Arryn noticed the increased treasury flexibility and commended Petyr. "Wherever you've learned this level of miserliness," he said over supper, "it's working." "From the fingers, my lord," Petyr answered with a smile. "We make silver stretch until it screams." It was in the 3rd month that he met her, Morella. She ran 3 of the finer brothels on Silk Street. Tall, lean, with white hair tied in rings, and eyes like polished iron. She offered him wine laced with mint. He offered her something better. "You keep ledgers, don't you?" he asked. "Of course. Let me rewrite them." She raised a brow. "And why would I let a little clerk touch my books?" "Because I can ensure they never reach the tax collector. And I can triple your profits in 6 months. She didn't laugh. That was why he liked her. Petyr began spending his nights in Silk Street, not for pleasure, but for whispers. Soldiers spoke in their cups. Squires bragged. Highborn men exposed their fears between breaths. He sat in the corner, sipping slowly, listening to every word. He learned which lord's son was gambling away his inheritance, which merchant's daughter was pregnant by a hedge knight, which septon was bedding boys in the sept of Baelor. He took notes, and he paid well. To the halls he gave coin for information. To the barkeeps, favours. To the city watch, silence. They called him the thin man with the silver tongue. He preferred that to Baelish. One night he crossed paths with Renly Baratheon. It was in the Red Keep's gallery hall, just past the moon door. Renly, young and golden, gave him a sideways glance. "You're Arryn's pet accountant, aren't you?" "I prefer financial steward," Renly smirked. "I heard you fixed the Crown salt contracts. You must be clever." Petyr bowed. "Only clever enough to be useful. Never enough to be threatening. Renly's eyes sparkled. Dangerous philosophy that, no, my lord. Safe. After that, he began receiving dinner invitations. Low ones, at first, then higher. He never drank too much. He never spoke too freely. But always he left with more than he came for. The spider was next. Petyr found Varys waiting in his office one afternoon. No guards, no warning. "Curious little nest you've built here," the eunuch said, inspecting a scroll. "You've been quite busy." Petyr stayed still. "Merely organising what others have neglected." And what have you organised about me?" "Nothing worth repeating." Varys smiled. "You'll go far." It was not a compliment. He began hosting his own gatherings. Quiet things, wine, bread and conversation. Always with someone new, a raven handler, a steward, a third cousin of a knight sworn to House Redwine. He let them talk. They always did. Jon Arryn summoned him privately one night. "You've made yourself useful," he said. "More than I expected." Petyr inclined his head. "My goal is to lessen your burdens." "Lessen them too much," Jon said, "and the council will notice you. Not all attention is safe." "I understand, my lord." "No, you don't." But Petyr was already thinking 2 moves ahead. He didn't want to be invisible forever. One evening, while walking the courtyard beneath the Hall of Lamps, he saw Catelyn Stark, or thought he did. She vanished into the crowd, a shadow, a memory, a scar. He didn't chase her. He didn't bleed this time. By year's end, Petyr Baelish was known. Not loved, not trusted, but known. And in King's Landing, that was worth more than knighthood. Chapter 5. The Whispers of Silk Street. King's Landing, 285 AC. By spring, Petyr Baelish no longer walked Silk Street. He moved through it, quiet as breath, light as rumour. The street lived up to its name. Silk-clad bodies leaned from windows at dusk, and laughter spilled from the brothels like wine from a slit cask. But underneath the velvet and powder, the rot ran deep. Lords slummed for pleasure. Squires wasted inheritances. Septons confessed sins they had no intention of abandoning. Petyr didn't judge them. He studied them. And more importantly, he used them. Morella had taught him that. She ran the finest house on the block, 3 stories of red shutters and gold-trimmed balconies, with walls painted in soft green, and women more dangerous than daggers. She ruled it like a queen in exile, her throne a chair of carved weirwood set beneath violet curtains. He'd first come to her as a partner. Now he was something else. Not her lover, not quite, not her master, certainly not, but her shadow, her ghost, her banker, and her most expensive secret. "Every man who enters this house leaves something behind," Morella told him, her legs crossed atop a bare fur divan as he tallied the month's ledgers. "Coin, I assume," he said, scratching a column. She sipped wine. "Yes. And truths. Little ones, big ones. They spill easier when their trousers are down. Do they know?" She smiled. "Not until it's too late." He looked up. "And what happens then? I remind them that secrets, like whores, stay loyal when well paid." Petyr began employing his own girls, not for pleasure, for information. 3 from Morella's house, 2 from elsewhere, 1 from the Red Keep itself, a handmaid in Pycelle's chambers, plain as boiled oats, but sharp-eyed and quiet. They were told nothing about each other. Each delivered whispers on folded parchment slipped into a cup or tucked beneath the edge of a bedpost. "Lord Mertyn is bedding the cook's son." Sir Boros was overheard cursing the Queen. "Giles Rosby has a hidden bastard north of the Trident. He logged everything. Names, sins, lies, Not all were useful, but some were priceless. The brothel became a second office. He worked there late, at a side table beneath Morella's window, listening to the murmur of sex and laughter while he balanced accounts. He bribed city watchmen to ignore his comings and goings. He hired a mute boy named Roth to guard the door and deliver scrolls. He bought ink from Liz, quills from Mir, and a satchel lined with silk and false bottoms. Inside it he carried 5 ledgers, one for coin, one for debts, one for secrets, one for names, and one he never showed anyone. That one was thin, bound in black leather, and on its first page it read, "To climb one must be seen, but to rule one must not." One night, in the quiet hours before dawn, Morella found him asleep at the table, ink smudged on his cheek, a half-finished letter clutched in his fingers. She studied him. There was no softness in her gaze, no affection, only curiosity. "You're going to be something awful," she whispered. He stirred. "What?" She leaned closer. "Nothing." His influence began to spread. Merchants owed him favours. Guards looked the other way. A few minor lords called him Petyr, never Baelish, and never Littlefinger, not to his face. He kept his robes plain, his voice mild, his smile warm. But his hands? They were always reaching. The Queen began to notice. Cersei Lannister was beautiful in the way fire was beautiful. If you stared too long, you got burned. Petyr kept his distance, observed, calculated. She dismissed him, as most did, but he caught her watching him once from across the council chamber. Her eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, in consideration. It was around that time the letters started disappearing. Not his. Others. Messages sent to and from the Red Keep vanished before delivery. One raven was found strangled in its cage, scroll missing. Another returned with the wax melted, the parchment replaced. Varys, of course, knew. He said nothing, but Petyr saw him watching too. They circled one another like rival spiders in a web already strung. Petyr made his move with a whisper. A letter arrived from Gulltown, meant for Jon Arryn's hand. Petyr intercepted it for filing. It was a complaint, Lord Grafton accusing a captain of smuggling Myrish silks under Arryn's seal. Petyr rewrote it, slightly. He added a name. The smuggler claimed the silks were bound for the Queen herself. He sealed it again, passed it on. 2 weeks later, the captain was hanged. Grafton's ships lost their contracts, and Petyr acquired a controlling interest in 3 new merchant ventures. He never mentioned the letter again. In bed with Morella that night, fully clothed, both of them, she asked him, "Do you think you'll ever stop?" He stared at the ceiling. "Stop what?" "Climbing." He shook his head. "There is no top, just better views." She laughed, low and bitter. "You're going to be king some day." He turned to look at her. "No, but I'll be the one who whispers in his ear." A new ledger began that night, blank, titled in red ink, "The Council." The first name written beneath it, Lord Renly Baratheon. Drinks too much, over-fond of pretty boys, can be charmed, likes to feel clever. He underlined that last part, then closed the book. Chapter 6. The Spider and the Rat. King's Landing, 286 AC. The first time Petyr caught Varys lying, it wasn't a grand revelation. No dramatic betrayal, no smoking parchment. It was a pause. A slight hesitation in the eunuch's tone during a small council meeting as he recounted the location of a Targaryen loyalist's rumoured hiding place. A flicker too long on the name. A beat before the town was spoken. Petyr smiled to himself. Even spiders misstep. He didn't challenge Varys. That would have been suicide. Instead, he waited. waited and watched. It was like playing Civasse with no board, no rules, and a man who already knew your next 10 moves. But Petyr didn't need to win. He just needed Varys to stop ignoring him, and to start underestimating him. He began laying traps, small ones. He told a kitchen boy a fabricated rumour about a knight sleeping with a sceptre. Within 3 days it reached Varys's ears. He knew because the knight was questioned, quietly, by guards wearing black and gold. Next, he arranged for a scribe to find a scroll accidentally misplaced in the Tower of the Hand, an innocent record of wheat shipment schedules, except it had been backdated to suggest Lannisport was hoarding grain. 2 days later, Cersei asked Grand Maester Pycelle why the western ports were stockpiling. It was working. Varys appeared in Petyr's chambers not long after, uninvited. "Do you enjoy games, Lord Baelish?" he asked, draped in lavender silk like a fat moth pretending to be a butterfly. Petyr didn't look up from his scroll. "Only when I win." Varys smiled with no warmth. "You've been quite the busy clerk. A new friend here. A missing letter there. Tisk tisk. What will your dear Jon Arryn think?" Petyr met his gaze. "He'll think I'm doing what he asked, keeping the Crown's books clean." You're not cleaning them. You're rewriting them, only the parts that were wrong." There was silence between them for a breath too long. Then Varys's voice dropped. "You think you're clever, but clever men often drown in the pools they stir." Petyr leaned forward. "And what about spiders who forget they're not the only ones spinning webs?" Varys's expression didn't change. "Oh, my sweet lord, I never forget." And then he was gone. That night Petyr didn't sleep, not out of fear, out of calculation. He'd been noticed. Now came the hard part, surviving it. He tightened his operations. He used 3 new intermediaries for coin collection. He rotated his couriers weekly. One of them was a child who played harp for tips outside the Iron Gate. Another was a one-eyed whore named Mesa who spat on anyone who called her darling. They were loyal, or at least well paid. He never used the same brothel twice in a fortnight. He burned half of his notes. The rest he copied into a cipher only he could read, based on a nursery rhyme he hadn't heard since the Fingers. Varys began testing him in turn. Scrolls vanished from the treasury. A contact in the City Watch was dismissed for misconduct. A low-born girl Petyr had paid to spy on the High Septon was found drowned in the Blackwater. Message received. So Petyr pushed back. He used Morella's girls to target a pair of Varys's informants, a merchant with a stutter and a sceptre who pretended to be mute. One was blackmailed into silence, the other disappeared quietly, without blood. He left no trail, but the absence made its point. Jon Arryn summoned Petyr again. "You've made enemies," the Hand said bluntly. Petyr sipped his wine. "I've made use of enemies. Don't be smug, boy. You're dancing on knives. Be careful whose attention you crave." Petyr nodded, then casually offered a correction on the toll revenue from the Blackwater ferry crossing, an error the Master of Ships had overlooked. Jon narrowed his eyes. "And how did you find that discrepancy?" Petyr smiled. "Because I looked. The next council meeting was different. Robert was drunk. Pycelle was nodding off. Renly was laughing at something Jaime Lannister had said. And Varys? Varys was watching Petyr, not with amusement, with interest. That was enough. Later that week, Morella delivered a gift. A ledger, unmarked. Inside a list of names, men who had visited a particular Silk Street brothel, men of the cloth, men of the sword, men with families. Petyr flipped through the pages slowly. There, 2 names he recognized. One he needed, the High Septon's cousin. He wrote a single letter that night, no threats, no demands, just facts. 2 weeks later, a new High Septon was appointed. Petyr never claimed credit, but the message was clear. He ran into Varys again at the library in the Tower of the Hand. They stood in silence, both pretending to read. Finally, Varys spoke. "You're not a rat, you know." Petyr didn't look up. "No, you're a knife. The kind that smiles while it cuts." Petyr turned a page. "Better than being a whisper with no hands." Varys chuckled. "We'll see who survives the silence first." That night, Petyr poured himself a cup of Arbor Red, opened his smallest black book, and added a new title beneath the council. Master of Whisperers, Varys the Spider, knows everything, says nothing can be misled, hates chaos, watch him, always. He drew a small web beside the name, and then, beneath it, a knife. Chapter 7, Master of Debts. King's Landing, 287 AC. The day Lord Ronell Harroway retired as Master of Coin, no one wept. He'd served under Jon Arryn for nearly a decade, an honest man by reputation, if not by ledger. Honest men, Petyr had learned, rarely lasted long in the Red Keep. Harroway left behind ledgers so dense with red ink they looked like battlefield maps. Petyr received the news in the council chamber as if it surprised him. He even had the grace to look hesitant when Jon Arryn turned to him. "You'll serve as acting Master of Coin until a replacement is named." He bowed. "As you command, my lord." He had already moved into Harroway's office by nightfall. The chamber was larger than his previous quarters, with a high arched ceiling, a window facing the sea, and a thick oak desk polished smooth by 1,000 palms more powerful than his. He stood behind it a long time that night, fingers resting on the surface, staring at the blank spot where the previous steward had kept his seal. By the end of the week, the seal bore a new sigil, a mockingbird. His first act wasn't to balance the crown's accounts, it was to own them. He created a new set of ledgers, separate, private, colour-coded with thread-wrapped spines. He began mapping out the debt web, who owed the crown, who the crown owed, and who stood to benefit if both sides collapsed. The crown's debt was worse than he feared. 70% of it was owed to the faith of the Seven and the Iron Bank of Braavos. The remaining 30, scattered among dozens of noble houses, mercantile guilds, and shadowy lenders who didn't even use names, just seals. Petyr sent his own ravens. He renegotiated 3 contracts in the first month, delayed payments, reorganized interest, shifted liabilities. He did it all without informing the council. It was easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission, and no one noticed when the money kept flowing. He began inviting select nobles to his office for private counsel. "Let me help you untangle your finances," he'd say. "A small debt to the crown is a dangerous thing, but if managed well, it can become a shield." They came in suspicious. They left in his debt. One evening, Renly Baratheon knocked on his door. Petyr was reviewing spice tariffs. "Come for a lecture on cinnamon imports?" he asked. Renly smirked. "You're very popular these days. Lord Oakhart says you shaved 10,000 stags off his debts. Only 7,400. The rest was illusion." "And how does one profit from illusion?" "By making sure the right people believe it." Renly leaned on the desk. "My brother likes coin, but he doesn't understand it. Most kings don't. You could teach him." Petyr poured him a cup of wine. "And why would I do that?" Renly's grin widened. "Because it's easier to feed a lion than tame it." By midsummer, the brothel profits doubled. Petyr now owned a majority stake in 5 establishments, 2 of which catered specifically to foreign dignitaries. He installed hidden rooms, mirrors, listening holes. Men spoke more freely with their breeches down and a cup of arbor gold in hand. Everything was recorded, everything was sorted, everything was useful. John Arryn called him again. "You've turned our insolvency into liquidity." Petyr smiled. "Words only coin counters love. I mean it. The king is pleased. Then perhaps the king should say so publicly." Arryn studied him. "You want the office? I already hold it. I'd simply like the title." Arryn shook his head. "You think names matter? Only to those who don't have them." 2 days later, Robert Baratheon signed the writ. Petyr Baelish, Lord of the Fingers, was appointed Master of Coin. The small council snickered. Renly offered a toast. Cersei smiled like a cat watching a mouse climb onto a dinner plate. Only Varys said nothing. That night, Petyr sat in his new chair at the council table and watched the rest of them with calm eyes and folded hands. They thought it was a joke. A clerk with ink-stained fingers and no noble name. But none of them controlled the debt, and in King's Landing, debt was heavier than steel. He began crafting his network more deliberately now. He installed a girl named Tanda inside the household of Lord Redwine, a boy named Pole in the kitchens of the Sept of Baelor, a minor steward in the household of Tywin Lannister's cousin. Each brought him information. In return, they got safety, coin, purpose. He didn't call it a network. He called it insurance. He met with Morella again, this time in his own chambers. She looked around at the gold-inlaid maps, the heavy drapes, the silver-plated ink pots. "You've done well," she said. "Only beginning," he said. "Men who say that are usually halfway to ruin. Not me. Why not?" He poured her a glass of wine. "Because I don't care if I'm ruined. I only care that they notice me before it happens." That night he opened the Black Ledger again. The Council, Master of Coin, Petyr Baelish. Status, active. He stared at the entry a long time. Then underneath it, in smaller script, he added, "Control the coin, and you control the court. Control the court, and you shape the realm. Control nothing, and own everything." He blew out the candle. Chapter 8. A Knife in the Dark. King's Landing, 288 AC. They found the body face down in a rain barrel behind the Chandler's Guildhall. No blood, no wounds, just a pale, bloated corpse with the signet rings still on the finger, House Riker's crest, unmistakable. The man had been Sir Garrison Ricker's cousin, young, brash, loud-mouthed, a regular on Silk Street and a known opponent of tax leniency reforms Petyr had proposed in council. No one linked the death to Petyr Baelish. They wouldn't. He hadn't ordered it. He'd merely suggested, during wine-soaked conversation with a lesser knight in the employ of Morella's house, that the man had become a liability, that he was disrupting the delicate harmony of debts. The knight had nodded, and 3 nights later the man stopped breathing. The lesson was clear. Petyr no longer needed to act. He only needed to imply. He took breakfast alone most mornings now. Thick bread, honeyed figs, and a boiled egg, always halved. He ate in silence, reading dispatches, marking ledgers. A servant came in, set a sealed scroll on the table. From Gulltown. Petyr cracked the wax and read. Lord Grafton had reopened trade negotiations. Finally, he thought. The man had resisted for months. Now he was begging for tax exemptions on salt exports. He claimed his rivals in the Vale were undercutting his prices, rivals Petyr had discreetly bankrolled 6 months earlier. Petyr didn't smile. He just penned a reply. "Generosity is possible when trust is restored. Send your figures." He set the scroll aside. then opened another one marked only with a red silk ribbon. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. It read, "Your girl in the High Septon's kitchens has grown bold. Her tongue is looser than she believes. A warning. Varys." Petyr dismissed the page and pulled out the black ledger. He turned to the page marked Faith. The girl's name was Mella. She'd been passing scroll summaries for 6 months. Nothing divine, but plenty profane. Mostly which lords visited the Great Sept, and which ones left with less gold than they arrived. He took out a fresh piece of parchment. Mella is to be relocated. Offer coin. If she refuses, use silk, not steel. He signed it with his seal. Mella would vanish, quietly. The second death came less cleanly. A brothel hand was found near Flea Bottom, throat cut, pockets full of silver. The City Watch chalked it up to a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't. He'd been feeding rumours to a sellsword company about the Crown's interest in hiring foreign blades. Petyr had fabricated the rumours. The sellswords had gotten greedy. The rumours reached Stannis Baratheon, and suddenly everyone was asking who was leaking strategic planning from the Treasury. The brothel hand had to go, and Petyr had to tighten the leash. He began consolidating his power. First, he offered financial advice to Lord Balon Swan, free of charge. Then to Sir Luther Largent, commander of the City Watch. Then to a cousin of House Redwine, whom he helped restructure land rents in the Reach. In return, he asked for nothing. Nothing but introductions and silence. At council meetings, the tone shifted. Cersei spoke less. Pycelle nodded more often. Varys smiled the same, but Petyr could feel the smile stretch thinner each week. Jon Arryn, for all his wisdom, seemed tired now, worn, distracted. He'd begun looking at Petyr as one might look at a chess piece mid-game, no longer harmless, but strategically necessary. That was the perfect place to be. It was around this time Petyr made a quiet visit to the docks. He wore a plain cloak and walked without guards. No one recognised him. He met with a merchant named Harros Moa, who ran a shipping fleet out of Pentos. They stood near the edge of the wharf, gulls circling, brine thick in the air. "Lys wants grain," Harros said. "Braavos wants silver. You control both." Petyr nodded. "You'll deliver to Gulltown. The rest I'll arrange. And payment?" He handed over a coin pouch. "A down payment. The rest comes once the goods are loaded, not before." Harros bit the coin, nodded. "You're colder than the narrow sea. Cold keeps the rot away." Later that week, a raven from Braavos arrived. The Iron Bank approved a line of credit in Petyr's name, not the Crown's. His. That night, Morella visited his chamber for the first time in months. She wore black velvet, no perfume. "You've changed," she said, circling the desk. "I've adapted. You used to laugh. I still do. Inside," she tilted her head. "You're not afraid?" "Of what?" "Of being the last one standing." He poured her wine. "That's the point." He received a letter the next morning from a steward in the Westerlands. The letter was unsigned. The wax bore the faint, faded lion crest of Lannister. It read, "If the debts of House Lannister are not removed from the Crown Ledger within 2 moons, there will be consequences." Petyr read it twice, then folded it, sealed it in a new envelope, and sent it directly to Grand Maester Pycelle with no explanation. The council erupted 2 days later when Pycelle brought it forward. Tywin was livid, Cersei fuming. Petyr sat calmly through it. At the end of the meeting, Robert turned to him and asked, "Can we remove it?" Petyr raised his hands. "We can do anything, Your Grace. But what we should do is another matter entirely." He left the chamber with half the council red-faced, and all of them watching him now. Good. Let them look, let them wonder, let them fear. That night he opened the Black Book. Under council he added a name, Lord Tywin Lannister. Too proud to bluff, too powerful to push. His rage is a storm, best navigated from shore. Beneath it, a smaller line, don't provoke lions unless you own the cage. Chapter 9, The King's Favour. King's Landing, 289 AC. King Robert Baratheon summoned Petyr just after the noon bell. No messenger, no formality, just a grunt from a guardsman in gold. The king wants you, now. Petyr closed his ledger with a soft thump. The throne room was nearly empty when he arrived. Robert sat slouched across the iron throne like a drunk atop a pile of nails, one leg over the armrest, a flagon dangling from his fingers. Behind him stood Sir Barristan, ever straight, ever silent. "Baelish!" Robert barked. "Come closer." Petyr walked slowly down the length of the hall, boots tapping against cold stone. He stopped just shy of the first step. "You sent me a note," Robert said, waving the flagon, "about coin." "You always send me notes about coin. I try not to disturb your grace with the burden of numbers." Robert laughed. "Good. I hate numbers. I like you, you get that?" He took a long pull from the wine, wiped his beard. "Tell me, are we broke?" Petyr clasped his hands. "Not quite, but close. Closer than is comfortable." Robert grunted. "Then make us comfortable. You've done it before. Do it again." "I'll do better," Petyr said softly. Robert stared at him, then gestured to the flagon. "Come drink with me. I don't." I said, "Drink." Petyr stepped up, took the flagon, drank. It tasted of oak and iron, and something vaguely like elderberries rotting in the sun. Robert laughed again. "You're a strange one, Baelish. Like a rat that learned to wear shoes. I find shoes practical, and I find you useful. So I'll tell you something, and I want you to keep it close." Petyr leaned in. Robert's voice lowered. "Jon Arryn is leaving, back to the Vale. Sick, he says. Tired, old." Petyr said nothing. "He's naming a new hand." Still, Petyr remained silent. "Not you, of course." Robert snorted. "But you're staying. You'll advise whoever comes next. Of course. You don't care who it is." "I only care that they don't interfere." Robert slapped his knee. "Gods, I like you. You don't beg. You don't flatter. You just do." He leaned forward now. "You ever think about what comes next? In what sense?" "When I'm gone?" Petyr hesitated. "I'd rather not, Your Grace." Robert grinned. "That's the right answer. But the wrong man says it." He stood, towering, and Petyr felt, truly felt for the first time, the weight of the crown's shadow. "You keep my realms solvent, Baelish. That matters more than most know." Then, surprisingly, Robert clasped his shoulder. "I'll see you again, when I'm drunker or dead." By nightfall, the entire small council knew Jon Arryn was stepping down. Speculation spread like wildfire. Petyr was never mentioned as a successor. He didn't care. He already had what mattered. The first banquet of the new moon brought half the court into the Red Keep's great hall. Peacocks roasted in wine. Musicians played tunes from Dawn and the Reach. Minstrels sang ballads of dead kings and prettier queens. Petyr sat between two minor lords, one from Cracklaw Point, the other from the Stormlands. Neither knew why they'd been placed next to him. Both would owe him money by the end of the month. Cersei Lannister walked the hall like a cat surveying its kill. She passed Petyr once, her gold dress brushing his sleeve. "Lord Baelish," she said with a smile, "Your Grace, I've heard interesting things about your methods. I prefer efficient. Some call them dangerous. Only those with something to lose." She stopped, studied him. "You have no banners, no armies, no name?" Petyr tilted his head. "That's what makes me dangerous." Cersei's smile didn't falter. "Then don't forget who owns the field. I never forget. But ownership is fluid." She left him with that look, the one that promised either sex or poison, possibly both. Later, Renly Baratheon pulled him aside near the fountain court. "You made a mistake with Tywin." "I made a move," Petyr replied. "Same thing, in this court." Petyr raised his cup. "Mistakes are the first bricks in a strong wall, if you know how to stack them." Renly smirked. "And if they bury you, then someone else pays for the stones?" By week's end, 5 new crown contracts had been secured under Petyr's management. 3 noble families were quietly in his debt. One old knight offered to wed his only daughter to him. Petyr declined. She was beautiful. But he didn't want a wife. He wanted leverage. The next council meeting was tense. Jon Arryn stood slowly, hands trembling, voice still strong. "I leave this city knowing its purse is well guarded," he said, "and its future in ambitious hands." He didn't name Petyr. He didn't have to. Afterward, Grand Maester Pycelle approached him. "You've become quite the fixture, Lord Baelish." "I'm like mould," he replied with a smile. "I thrive in damp places and ruin—" Pycelle didn't laugh, but Varys, who overheard from behind a column, chuckled lightly. Petyr turned just in time to meet the spider's eyes, still circling, still watching, but no longer ignoring. That night Petyr returned to his chamber alone. He poured wine, sat by the hearth, opened the black ledger. Under counsel he added the King, Robert Baratheon, indulgent, unpredictable, easily pleased, easily bored. Leverage lies in managing his chaos. Then, with slower strokes, the Queen, Cersei Lannister, smiles like a knife, thinks in poison, plays the long game. Not yet predictable, but not immortal either. Finally, under future threats, a single line. Who inherits the throne matters less than who counts the coin. He leaned back. The game had changed. And Petyr Baelish? He was done playing pieces. He was ready to move the board. Chapter 10. Climbing the Ladder. King's Landing, 290 AC. The mockingbird pin was small, gold, subtle, easy to miss unless you were looking. Petyr wore it for the first time to a midday council session, fastened beneath the fold of his cloak where light kissed the edge just so. Varys noticed. Of course he did. Cersei didn't blink, but her eyes lingered. Renly gave a faint smirk and whispered later, "Careful, too many wings draw hawks." Petyr's reply, "Wings are only dangerous if they cast a shadow." Lord Jon Arryn was gone, back to the Vale. Not dead yet, but far enough removed that his influence had faded like old chalk in rain. The small council had begun reshaping without him. King Robert was absent most days, hunting, drinking, fucking, which left the kingdom effectively to the council. And on that council, none spoke louder in whispers than the man who spoke the least during meetings. Petyr listened. He tracked every sigh, every hesitation, every flick of Varys's fingers, and every glance Cersei cast across the chamber. By the end of each session, he knew more than anyone had said aloud. By the end of the week, he knew what no one had meant to say at all. He moved into a new manse overlooking the Street of Silk, modest by court standards, opulent by his own. 5 bedrooms, 2 studies, a small hidden door behind the bookshelf in the library that led to a private chamber only 2 people knew about, Petyr and the man who installed it. The man was found dead in Flea Bottom a month later. Of course, he expanded his holdings, tenements, storefronts, ships, taverns, all under false names, traded through a daisy chain of shell brokers and minor lords too drunk or desperate to notice who now held their debts. Morella became more than a partner. She became an institution. Whispers about Littlefinger's empire started cropping up among the small folk. He didn't correct them, didn't confirm, he just smiled and built. He took meetings at dusk, always dusk, by candlelight, in quiet rooms that smelled of parchment and spiced wine, merchants, sellsword captains, maesters, lesser lords, chambermaids, septons, bakers, all with something to sell, all with something to hide. He kept ledgers for each, not of coin, of secrets. One evening, Grand Maester Pycelle confided over lemon cakes and port that House Celtigar was struggling with pirate raids. Petyr nodded, offered assistance, suggested a quiet loan from the Crown, at a modest interest rate, of course. Within a fortnight, House Celtigar bent knee not to the Crown but to him. Loyalty bought in silver weighs more than vows sworn in steel. He began drafting letters to the Iron Bank, directly, not as master of coin, as Petyr Baelish. He offered them what no other Westerosi lord dared, transparency. He sent them real numbers, real debts, real forecasts. And when they replied with tentative curiosity, he replied with confidence. The Crown's name faded from the margins, his grew. In a lesser man's story, this would be the climax. But for Petyr, it was the middle. He stood one night on the balcony of his manse, watching the city lights flicker across rooftops like scattered fireflies. The wind off Blackwater Bay carried the stink of salt and sewage and something old and broken. He breathed it in. "This city is mine," he whispered. A raven landed nearby. He turned, took the scroll. The seal was gold wax, imprinted with a crowned stag. Robert. Unusual. He cracked it. Read. "Lord Baelish, we commend your unmatched stewardship of the realm's finances. You will henceforth have full authority to oversee crown revenue, debt and expenditures, and act in His Grace's name on all financial matters requiring expediency or discretion. Signed by the King, stamped by Pycelle, endorsed by the small council." He folded the scroll, lit a candle, held the edge of the parchment to the flame, watched it curl and blacken, the ink vanishing first, then turned to his desk and wrote a letter of his own, not to the King, not to the council, to a broker in Lace. 2 weeks later, 4 barrels of blackmail ledgers arrived in the city under cover of spice shipment. He stored them in a vault beneath the manse. The man who delivered them vanished off the dock before the moon rose. When the King returned from his hunt, he was too drunk to notice anything had changed. But the rest of the court had. They called Petyr Lord Baelish now. They said it with thin smiles, tight lips, and careful deference. They watched how close he stood to Cersei, how often Varys walked past his door, how quiet Renly had become when Baelish entered a room. Morella visited one last time. She stood at his balcony, looking out. "You've done it." He said nothing. "You're not reaching any more," she said. "You've climbed." He shook his head. "No," he murmured, "not yet. I've only found the ladder." She turned to him. "And where does it end?" He smiled. "It doesn't." That night, in his private chamber, Petyr opened the black book one final time. He turned past the council, past the debts, past the names. On the last page he wrote, "Power resides not in the throne, but in the shadows that weigh it down." He paused. Then beneath it, "Chaos isn't a pit, it's a ladder, and I am climbing the end. Author's note. Thank you for joining me on this descent into ambition. Petyr Baelish is one of Westeros's most fascinating creatures. Not a knight, not a king, not a conqueror, but a man who shaped the game from the shadows. This story was never meant to make him likeable, it was meant to make him inevitable. Through 10 chapters, we followed a boy who bled for love, learned from loss, and built a kingdom of whispers while the realm played at war and glory. Every coin, every bed, every secret he touched was a rung on the ladder, and by the time they noticed, he was already halfway to the top. If you enjoyed this origin tale and want to see more stories that explore the untold paths of familiar characters, please consider liking the video, leaving a comment below, or subscribing to the channel for more immersive Game of Thrones tales. Your support helps keep the ink flowing and the shadows whispering. Until next time, Brian M. Brumbaugh.